So, when we talk about energy justice, before we get to energy justice, we have to talk about how we got here. Before we address justice, we have to understand the unjust. Because if we don't know our history and know the roots of these issues, then how are we supposed to prepare the next generation? And how is it are we supposed to prepare to provide policy and insight on addressing these issues that have been plaguing us for really centuries, really. When we look at the underlining of racism within policy, when we look at what redlining have done to our communities and to communities of color and low income communities, when we look at what the health aspect of communities of color, when we look at legacy pollution, industries and factories and that was in a community 20, 30 years ago, but no longer there, but that contamination is still right there in the community. So they might have, that business or that corporation or whatever might have closed, in the 80s or 70s or 90s, but the aftermath and the pollution is still there in the ground and it affects our health deeply. Here in Grand Rapids, on the southeast side in the 49507 zip code, we have some of the worst cases of asthma. When we look at the rate of asthma within our neighborhoods, we also have a high rate of children dying from lead poisoning. It's sometimes it's a shame that people in the community give their own community nicknames like Cancer Way, because we know that in our community, a lot of residents are diagnosed with cancer. I think we have to go to that underlying issue, which is, racism. The racism and the divestments we have within Black and Brown communities. This is the aftermath that you get. We get energy burden. We get energy poverty. This is what we see when we look at energy poverty. Energy poverty is when you have lack of access to modern energy services. You can't afford energy, efficient energy services. Basically, we have what we have in our community is families making a choice. Do we pay for our utility bills or do we pay for groceries? When we look at the issues of energy justice, we have to talk about the racism within the policies on how we got to energy poverty and energy burden. When we talk about just when we look at trees, trees in urban communities or communities of color, we see a very limited amount of trees within those communities. Trees is one of those, tree cutting is one of those things when Redline was started that basically created ways where our communities wasn't more resilient when it comes to reducing carbon emission, reducing pollution. It's studies that have been done that more access to trees and more access to green space brings an overall healthy life to our community and to the people in the community. And so it's something that we must talk about. Then we can talk about energy justice. What we're seeing right now is we're seeing cases where utility companies have a monopoly on our utilities, on our energy. And we have some of the worst, service when it comes to energy in the whole country. We literally have the worst when it comes to access to reliable energy in the country. We pay some of the highest utility rates in the Midwest. Families are struggling. Whenever we have extreme weather events, most likely a lot of individuals across Michigan will be without power. And so it's like, how did we get to this point? And again, it's the capitalist society that we live in, and it's greed and it's money. Whenever we put greed and money in front of people, then you're automatically um, at a bad starting point. You're automatically at a point where um, you're coming from 5 steps behind. Everybody deserves access to energy. Everybody deserves access to live a healthy, clean air life through clean air. Um, if our community is not safe when it comes to clean air, we can't tell our kids like, "Hey, let's go out to the park today." Um, no, we can't tell our kids to go out to the park because the air quality levels is not, where they need to be. We have to reduce the access just for children to have fun and live their lives. Um, One of the things I always do is always focus in on equity with policies, equity within everything we do. We can't do something and not have equity within it. Equity is the root cause, um, should be the root cause of everything you do. It's so funny. I listened to one of the previous episode with Sergio, and Sergio said, when you've been working in equity or been doing equity work for so long, it doesn't leave you. That's a very profound statement, where equity becomes a part of life. It shouldn't be this thing where you have to take a master class on learning equity. Equity is a basic human rights issue. As we look out for our communities, we say, I am my brother and sister's keeper, but if we're not pushing forward on equity, how can we be our brothers and sisters keeper? And so, I think when we're talking about energy justice, when we're talking about ways we can really go out and reshape, the landscape, we have to go with the underlying issues of the unjust. And then once we understand the unjust, we can all come to the table and figure out how can we now go for energy justice. When we look at the opportunities we have, a lot of people talk on it or hear on the news talking about renewable energy and clean energy. We have a very amazing opportunity here when it comes to getting projects and getting clean renewable energy projects in our community from federal investment dollars. When we look at community solar, when we look at what is community solar, and when we look at the benefits of community solar, ultimately when we have community solar, we can also ease the burden when it comes to families dealing with trying to manage, are they going to pay their utility bill or are they going to get diapers for their kids? When we have community solar, we can better look out for each other. But currently right now, we have, we don't have access to community solar due to bad policies we have. We don't have access to rooftop solar due to bad policies. So, one of the amazing things, within the work that we're doing is understanding why getting involved and having conversations with your legislators is so important. One of the things at Michigan LCV, currently right now, is a lot of talks around budget. What's the legislator's budget? What's the state budget for this year? One of the big things we're really pushing is allocating for $40 million in funds to create renewable energy ready projects and getting communities and updating communities when it comes towards local clean energy projects. And that's something very simple when it comes to weatherization of homes, really improving your heating and cooling systems, providing funds from the local level, from the state level and federal level to provide resources where you can get heating pumps. Due to the Inflation Reduction Act, residents have opportunities to get tax credits when it comes to heating pumps. And so we must let people know about that. And so that's one of the things we're pushing at Michigan LCV. Also, one of the things we're pushing is for removing the unnecessary restrictions on the 1% cap on rooftop solar. Um, Everybody should have access to solar and rooftop solar. Companies and corporations shouldn't dictate, um, can I put it up, solar panels on my home? Companies and corporations shouldn't do that. So we must fight to remove those limitations and provide every access. Again, that equity piece, provide everybody with the access and not just corporations and businesses just to make a dollar. And then also one of the key things I think is really big is workforce development. Workforce development when it comes to clean and renewable jobs. This is a big part because at the end of the day, money talks, bullshit walks. And when it comes to that, people are struggling because people don't have access to economic opportunities. People don't have the job trainings. People don't have the education or the tools or the resources. One of the biggest things we're pushing at Michigan LCV is pushing for investments. Basically $1 billion investments on workforce development with no college education, because we must remove those barriers that we have. The clean renewable energy field should not just be for the few and privileged. It should be for everybody. Again, we talk about that issue called equity. So, that's just my little 2 cents. And thank you, Green Rabbits Podcast.